If you went back to 2007 and told a serious investor that the next $100 billion company would be a website where you pay to sleep on an air mattress on a complete stranger's living room floor, they would laugh in your face, and rightfully so. The idea for Airbnb defied humanity's most basic survival instinct, something our parents taught us since the moment we learned to walk. Don't trust strangers. For decades, the hotel industry dominated the world because it offered standardization and safety. You knew that when you walked into a Hilton in New York or Tokyo, the towel would be the same and the door would lock. The going to some random person's house seemed dangerous, dirty, and frankly, a stupid idea that would never reach global scale. But three broke guys in San Francisco had no choice and didn't have the luxury of analyzing the market with that logic. They had no money for rent, no investors, and for a long time, the only thing they owned was a mountain of credit card debt and some cereal boxes assembled with hot glue. Today, on Money and Magnates, we are going to tell the story of how Brian Chesky, Joe Gebbia, and Nathan Blecharczyk transformed an idea rejected by all the Silicon Valley geniuses into a company that came to be worth more than the largest traditional hotel chain in the world. But before that, subscribe to the channel to help us out, leave a like, and welcome to Money and Magnates. This is the story of Airbnb.
It's like you're still going to be focusing on your core, which is home sharing, and this year you did scale back on some of those other projects.
The government has signalled a series of measures which it's considering to relax the lockdown while minimising the risk of coronavirus spreading.
To understand the depth of the hole they were in, we need to go back to October 2007. The world was about to enter the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. But in San Francisco, the problem was more immediate. Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia were two designers who had recently graduated from the Rhode Island School of Design. They moved to the city with that glint in their eyes, typical of those who want to change the world. But reality hit fast and hard. The landlord of their apartment, a loft on Roche Street, suddenly raised the rent to $1,150. They looked at their bank account and the balance was literally zero. Eviction wasn't just a possibility, it was a mathematical certainty within a matter of days. It was in this moment of absolute panic that necessity created opportunity. Joe noticed that during that same weekend, an international industrial design conference was happening in the city. Every hotel in San Francisco was at maximum capacity. There wasn't a single bed available for miles. Joe sent an email to Brian with an idea that sounded like a desperate joke. What if we turned our apartment into a bed and breakfast for the designers who couldn't get a room? The problem was they didn't have extra beds. They slept on old mattresses. What they did have, tucked away in the back of the closet gathering dust, were 3 inflatable air mattresses. They rushed to put together an extremely rudimentary website programmed in a hurry called airbedandbreakfast.com. The promise was honest and simple. A place to sleep on the floor, a Wi-Fi connection, a desk for designing, and, for breakfast, Pop-Tarts, those processed American toaster pastries, which they served straight out of the box. The price? $80 a night. They expected no one to show up, maybe a lost backpacker at most. But to their absolute surprise, 3 qualified professionals knocked on the door. The first was Amol, a 30-year-old Indian designer. The second was Kat, a woman from Boston. And the third was Michael, a father from Utah. These 3 people paid $80 to sleep on a plastic mattress on the living room floor of 2 strangers. But something magical happened that week. Brian and Joe didn't just hand over the keys, they became tour guides. They took the guests out to dinner, showed them the city, and talked about design. By the end of the weekend, they had $1,000 in their pockets and the rent was paid. Right then, a light bulb went off. They realized the value wasn't in the air mattress. The value was in the human connection. A hotel gives you isolation and anonymity. Airbnb gave you belonging and friendship. They called Nathan Blecharczyk, a former roommate and programming genius, to join the team and build the platform for real. The problem was that after the initial excitement came what Silicon Valley entrepreneurs call the Valley of Sorrow. They officially launched the site at the SXSW Festival in 2008, one of the biggest tech events in the world. Expectations were high. The result? 2 bookings. And here's the humiliating detail. One of those bookings was from Brian Chesky himself. Testing to see if the payment button worked, no one used fixed it. No one wanted it. They tried to relaunch the site in the press 3 times. All 3 times, no one noticed. The silence was deafening. Desperate, they decided they needed professional capital. They scheduled meetings with 7 major investors, the cream of the crop of smart money. They were asking for $150,000 for 10% of the company. That would value Airbnb at just $1.5 million. The result was an emotional massacre. 5 rejected them with short, cold emails. 2 didn't even bother to reply. One of them, in a scene Brian never forgot, stood up in the middle of coffee while Brian was pitching, said the idea was insane, and walked out without even finishing his drink. The general consensus was unanimous. The market is too small and someone is going to end up getting murdered in a stranger's house. They were alone and broke. To keep the site live, they started living off credit cards. Each of the founders accumulated tens of thousands of dollars in personal debt. They had a collection of cards kept in plastic binders, the kind used for collecting baseball cards. Their financial strategy was to transfer the debt balance from one card to another before the interest rates exploded. They would wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, knowing that financial ruin and personal bankruptcy were just one step away. And this is where the bizarre moment happens that defines whether you are an entrepreneur or just a dreamer. It was 2008, election season in the United States. The phenomenon of Barack Obama versus the veteran John McCain. It was all the country talked about. With no money and no investors, they had an absurd idea to generate cash. What if we sold cereal? Yes, food. Breakfast cereal. They designed custom cereal boxes with caricatures of the candidates. They created Obama O's, the cereal of hope, and Captain McCain's, a maverick in every bite. But they didn't have money for production. They went to a local print shop and convinced the owner to print 1,000 cardboard boxes on the promise that they would pay a percentage of the sales later. With the cardboard boxes in hand, they went to the grocery store, bought the cheapest cereal they could find, and went back to the apartment. Imagine the scene. 3 founders of a tech company with degrees in design and engineering, sitting on the kitchen floor, manually filling 1,000 cereal boxes and sealing the bottoms with hot glue. They burned their fingers and made a mess of the whole place, but they kept going because it was their only chance at survival. They advertised the boxes as limited edition collector's items for $40 each. $40 for a cardboard box with cheap cereal. Believe it or not, the strategy worked. They sent boxes to news bloggers, CNN talked about it, and they sold out. They made a profit of $30,000 selling cardboard and sugar. That money paid off the credit card debts and kept the website server running. It was the first investment round in the history of Airbnb, funded entirely by American stomachs and the founders' stubbornness. This cereal incident was the key that opened the door to the future. Still struggling to grow, they applied to Y Combinator, the most prestigious startup accelerator in the world. They were called in for an interview with Paul Graham, the founder of the accelerator, known for being brutally honest. The conversation was a disaster. Graham hated the idea for Airbnb. He thought the concept was ridiculous and asked, "What's wrong with hotels?" He didn't see a problem that needed solving. As the interview was ending and they were about to be rejected, Joe Gebbia had an instinct. He stopped, reached into his backpack, and pulled out a box of the Obama O's cereal they had made. He placed the box on Paul Graham's desk and told the story of the hot glue and the survival. Paul Graham looked at the box. He looked at the 3 guys, and he said the phrase that changed everything. "Wow, you guys are like cockroaches. You don't die." He continued, "If you can convince people to pay $40 for a $4 box of cereal, maybe, just maybe, you can convince strangers to sleep in each other's houses." He accepted Airbnb into Y Combinator not because of the business idea, but because the founders were indestructible. Inside the accelerator, they received the most valuable piece of advice in startup history. The site still wasn't growing in New York, the primary market. Paul Graham asked where the users were, and when they said New York, Graham told them to get out of California and go there. "Do things that don't scale," he said. Tech logic says everything has to be automatic and scalable, but Graham said to do the opposite. Manual labor. They flew to New York in the middle of winter. They stayed in the actual Airbnbs listed on the site to understand the problem. And the problem became obvious as soon as they walked into the homes. The photos. The photos were terrible. They were taken with old cell phones. They were dark. They showed bathrooms with the seats up and cluttered corners. No one trusts the dark. You don't pay to sleep in a place that looks like a crime scene. Brian and Joe rented a professional Canon camera. They went personally, door to door, knocking on the houses of hosts in Brooklyn and Manhattan and said, "Hi, we are the founders of the website. Can we come in and take professional photos of your apartment for free?" They walked through the snow, entered strangers' homes, straightened soft pillows, opened curtains to let the light in, and took magazine-quality photos. They went back to the hotel, edited the photos, and uploaded them to the site. The magic happened instantly. When beautiful photos replaced the bad ones, revenue doubled in a week. Then, it doubled again the following week. They realized that Airbnb wasn't a tech company. It was a trust company packaged in design. A beautiful photo told the customer's brain, "This is safe, this is clean, this is real." From that moment on, growth became exponential. They created mechanisms to institutionalize trust, verified profiles with IDs, a double review system, and later, a $1 million insurance policy to protect homeowners against damages. They turned fear into a system. The company grew and became a global giant. It became worth $1 billion, then $10 billion, then $30 billion. But every hero's journey needs a final challenge. In 2020, Airbnb was on top of the world, preparing its IPO, going public on the stock market to be one of the largest in history. And then the world stopped. The COVID-19 pandemic hit the planet. Borders closed. Planes stayed on the ground. In a matter of weeks, Airbnb lost 80% of its revenue. Massive cancellations, billions of dollars in refunds. The financial press declared the company dead, saying that the sharing model is over. Brian Chesky had to make the hardest decision of his life. To save the ship from sinking, he needed to cut weight. He had to lay off 25% of all employees, about 1,900 people. But the way he did it became a Harvard leadership case study. Instead of a cold dismissal over Zoom, he wrote a public, transparent, and vulnerable letter. He explained exactly why. He allowed all those laid off to keep their company laptops. He maintained their health insurance for 1 year. And he turned Airbnb's recruiting team into an agency to place those people in other companies. And then he pivoted the business. While everyone else was looking at the problem, Brian looked at the data. He noticed that people stopped flying to major cities, but they didn't want to stay locked up. They wanted to escape to the countryside, to mountain cabins, places where they could work remotely. Airbnb changed the site's entire algorithm to focus on local stays and long-term stays. The bet worked. The business recovered faster than any hotel chain. In December 2020, still in the middle of a global pandemic, Airbnb held its IPO on the Nasdaq. It was one of the most spectacular debuts in financial market history. Shares skyrocketed. The company, which months earlier seemed dead and buried, closed the day worth over $100 billion. The three founders, who 13 years earlier were hot-gluing cereal boxes to avoid being evicted, became established multi-billionaires. As of February 10, 2026, Forbes estimates that the three Airbnb founders have already accumulated massive individual fortunes. Brian Chesky with about $8.5 billion, Joe Gebbia with about $7.6 billion, and Nathan Blakarczyk with about $8.2 billion. The story of Airbnb is not about air mattresses. It is about design-solving trust problems. They broke a social barrier that had existed for centuries. Today, staying in an Airbnb has become a verb, just like Googling something. They proved that the cockroach mentality, the pure resilience to do whatever it takes to survive, is worth more than any perfect business plan. And the question that remains for you is, what stupid or risky idea are you putting aside because you are afraid of what others will think? Sometimes the billion-dollar idea is hidden right behind the fear of looking ridiculous. Now, comment down below. Do you prefer the safety of a hotel or the experience of an Airbnb? And if you liked this video, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. See you then.